Hey everyone, this is Matt Perez and welcome to video 9 in our SOLIDWORKS API Project Tracker series. Now, at this point in time, we have our first user form pretty much complete. Now, of course, we're going to have to go back in, change some of the code and edit some of the functionality once we start to interact and deal with Excel. But at this point in time, since we're dealing with user forms, I need to add a few more user forms. We're going to have to handle the case where the user does not enter a note. If we want to give them the option to enter a note after they've logged out, we want to make a prompt basically saying yes or no, whether or not they want to add a note. If they say no, then we'll manually control what goes in the note line. If they say yes, we need to give them another user form that has a note and that has an OK button or a log out button or whatever the case might be. Then we also need to handle the case where the file is missing both the project number and project name, or it's missing one or the other. So we're going to have a user form that has both of these on it, a user form that has one or the other, and then a user form that has our note. So we want to start by inserting another user form. Now in this case, user form 2, we can rename these. So in this case, user form 2, I'm going to say user form note. That way I have a good understanding of what this user form is doing. So at this point, I want to add a few things. I'm going to add a frame just to keep with the same look as the rest of my program. So we have a frame, and inside the frame, we're going to say note. Now we're going to change the special effect to raised. And let's take a look at what this note looks like. Now we want to go ahead and we want to add a text box in here. We do need to add a text box, but we also need to add a button. So we need to be mindful of the space that we're working with and how much space we actually want to use. We want to control the name of this text box. Instead of text box 1, we can say txbx note add. And then we're going to change the overall size of the user form and add a command button. Now this command button is only going to be a single button on this form. We can change the name to done or save or whatever we want this to say. And in this case, we're going to change the text. We're going to make it bold and we're going to make it 12 point. Alright, so at this point, let's take a look at what the note looks like. If it looks different from the rest of our forms, then we can very easily change things. For instance, note should be bold and it should be 10-point font. We also want to change the border style. We can make it single style and have that look more like the rest of our notes. Alright, so at this point, this user form 2, in this case it says user form 2 at the top, user form 2, which is actually note form, this has its own code. If we right click on it and view code, of course there's nothing here. We haven't done anything yet, but there is its own user form code. And we'll get to the code, the background information, after we've created all the rest of the forms. That way we make sure that we handle all our bases. So I'm going to go ahead and add another form. In this case, I'm going to rename it from user form 2 to be user form custom properties. Now this user form 2, we're going to have to define the project name and project number. So we're going to call the overall form custom properties. And we need to add an area for the users to do this. So we can add 2 of these frames. We can copy the first one and paste it. So that way we have 2 of the same frames. Frame 1 is going to be, in this case, frame 1 will be project number. And again, we need to change the text to make sure that we keep some sort of continuity between the rest of our program. We're going to change it to bold, 10-point. And frame 2 will be project name. Alright, so within here we also need a command button. And again, because we're dealing with these forms, we don't necessarily have to follow any sort of common size, but you can very easily come back and change these properties. Now this command button, instead of being command button 1, we're going to go ahead and say save as well and change the text. Again, bold, we'll do 12-point. And inside of these 2 different frames, we need a text box. We need a place for the user to interact. So we're going to place a text box in here. We need to make sure that everything's aligned the way we want it to be. And change the overall length of it. In this case, width is 186. We might want to make it a bit shorter. And we want to make sure that we name this. Now, it's automatically going to be bold based on whatever properties you gave to the overall frame. But we need to make sure that we change things and keep them how we want it to be. Text box 1, instead, I'm going to say txbx proj num add. And then what I want to do is basically copy that and paste it. Or we can simply copy its properties. We know that it's 30 high. We know that it's 182 wide. So we can very easily add another one in here as well. And as we look at the properties, 30 high, 182 wide. Now in this case, we want to rename this one, instead of text box 1, txbx proj name add. All right, so now we have our save button. We need to rename cmb save. Now these names are going to be form specific, so you don't have to worry too much about having this name being the same as a command button on another form. For instance, user form for the note. We rename this command button to cmb save. It's not going to matter because this is cmb save at note form, and then this other one is cmb save at user form custom properties. So it doesn't really matter too much, and it might be a good idea to name them the same if they're doing the same function. So a lot of times that can help you with the overall program. Let's take a look at this form and see what it looks like. Pretty easy to interact with, but the boxes are rather big for the text that we're dealing with. So we might want to come back and we might want to modify their height values from 30 to be something like 18, like the rest of our program. And then we can move them around or resize things as needed. All right, so as we look at our form now, if we type in a project number, the text box is now roughly the same size. You can see we need to control the bold, make that regular for project name. And then this user form should be complete. Now, of course, we still need to come back and do the code on the back end, but as I said, I'm going to handle all the user forms first to make sure I cover all my bases. So at this point, we have a user form for the additional note, user form for custom properties. We need to create a user form that handles custom properties, but it handles them individually rather than both of them. So I'm going to insert a new user form, and I pasted this text box because it's the exact same size as the one I need. Then I want to add a frame. Now we can always go back to our other windows and take a look at our properties. For instance, the project number frame is currently oriented 12 from the left, it's 48 high and 210 wide. So if I go into user form 2, we can change this to 210 wide, 48 high, and we can change the alignment from 18 to 12. So now we know it's in the same location as the other form. We want to change it from frame 1 to be, in this case, we'll say project number, and then we want to move this text box up and align it. So you can see here that I copied this text box from the other form and I kept the same name, txbx proj num add. So that follows the same nomenclature as what I'm already doing on the other side. That makes the code just a little bit easier. We want to make sure that the text inside here is not bold, that it is regular, 10-point font, and we've handled project number. We need to rename our user form. I'm changing the name. It needs to have no spaces in here. In this case, it's going to be user form project number, and then we want to change the caption to project number. We also need to add a command button to save. So we're going to pop it in there. We're going to change its caption to be save. We're going to change the text. It's going to be bold, 12-point font, and then we can resize the overall form. So now we have our user form project number, and everything looks good on this one. We can go ahead and create a new form, and this form, user form 2, is going to be user form project name. We're going to change the caption to be project name, and now we want to add a frame. Now again, we have the same properties, 210, 48, its alignment is 12. We want to change the overall properties of this. We're going to change the caption from frame to project name. We're going to change its text to be bold, 10-point font, and then we want to add this text box inside of it. Now this text box, project num add, we want to change that. It's actually going to be project name add. We also want to make sure that the text is not bold, it's regular, 10-point font. Then we add our save button. Command button 1, its caption is going to be save. Change the text. And then resize our form. Now the reason I handled all these forms at the same time is to make sure that I keep the same nomenclature, I keep the same workflow. I try to make them look as similar as possible. They don't have to be the same, but you want to make sure that you keep the user engaged and you don't switch things up in the middle of the program. So now I know that they're all the same. They use the same type of naming conventions for things like the save button. Command button 1 should be CMB save. If I go back to another one, command button CMB save, project name CMB save. If I go to project number, you can see that I left it as command button. I need to come in here CMB save. So this is a real quick way to go back and forth between all of the forms and make sure that everything's working properly. Another thing you might want to do is make sure things like the project name and project number forms are the same size. As you can see when I switch back and forth between the two, that they're actually a little bit different size. The name one is slightly larger than the number. We can do things like select this button. We can see that save is oriented from the left 138. So if I go back to this one, I can see that this is oriented from the left 144. So I can change its orientation. Project name is oriented from the top 66, whereas this one is oriented from the top 72. So I can change that as well. Go back to this one, we see that it's 30 high, 84 wide. This one is 30 high, but it's only 78 wide. So we change it to 84. We can make sure that it has right alignment. We can make sure that it's in the same location. Then we can make sure that the overall form height is the same as well. 127.5. Let's just go ahead and make this 128. Go back to this form, make this 128. All right, so now as we switch back and forth between the two, you can see they look identical. The location of everything is the same, the button sizes are the same, everything looks the same. There, at no point in time would the user be prompted for both of these unless you decided you didn't want to use this specific form when they had to access both of these custom properties. So now that we've created all of these user forms, I'm going to save the project, and in the next video we'll start to take a look at where and when we can access these and how we can use their values in the rest of our code. Because if we go back to the code for user form 1, when we initialize, we have a lot of conditional statements in here. We check for custom properties. We check to see if project name and project number are there. Now, if they're not there, then we have these if, else, if statements to determine what to do. So at this point in time, we have manually entered things like the project name and project number, but we want to use the user form instead. So we're going to go through the if, else if statements here and access user forms as needed. So very important information. We're going to handle how to interact with these forms in the next video. That way we don't clutter up and cover too many topics in the same video. But if you have any questions on the rest of those user forms, please email us at solidworksupport@mlc-cad.com, and we'll see you next time.